All right, let's go ahead and get started then. It's Friday, the 7th of May. It's Town of Rutland Board of Selectmen meeting. I declare this meeting open. We only have one item on the agenda. That item pertains to town meeting and town election. It is the discussion of possible action regarding annual town elections, annual town meeting and override. And I guess we'll just kick this off. As you know, we've been working on the budget for quite some time. Ron and FinCom have been working very hard in projecting impacts, putting together impact statements, publishing as much information on the website as possible. There has been a hiccup in that we are now being provided a new number by the school district, which kind of changes the nature of both our meeting and the election. Not to mention the logistics behind planning something through COVID and then the whole thing. So, Ron, do you kind of want to walk us through?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chairman. So around Tuesday, I got notice that the school committee was going to be holding a special meeting to discuss changing the school assessments. And, I thought it was pretty interesting. And I called Daryl, and Daryl told me, Daryl's the school superintendent, in case anyone doesn't know, but Daryl tells me, yep, they're going to be changing the assessments, and they were going to lower the increase to somewhere under 150. I'm sorry, let me just think of this again.
It was $193,000.
Yeah, that's the reduction, but I was going to say under 500,000 is what I was looking for. But 192,000 is what ended up coming with it. He wouldn't give me the number because he said that he hadn't yet given it to the school committee, so he didn't want to make it public to me or the finance committee and have us make it public. So I asked him, I said, could you privately give it to me, the finance board chair, and the town accountant? So listen, town meeting is coming up Saturday, and we need to try to develop a budget, and what your number is going to completely throw us off. So he said he would talk to the school chair. I heard nothing about it. On Wednesday, they actually published the agenda for the Thursday meeting, and I saw the numbers that were being proposed, and I sent them out to the select board and to the finance committee. On Thursday, I get a call from the business manager to tell me what the numbers were. I got to admit, I was a little puzzled since I asked for them early, and I didn't get them until after they posted them to the rest of the world. But the reality of the problem is this, is they cut the assessment by over $190,000. And that has a tremendous impact on the budget that FinCom and I have worked together to produce. As you know, we really worked hard to demonstrate to the citizens of the town what the impact would be on all the cuts that we made. And it was all over, the town website and Facebook and all the social media sites. And we wanted to educate the people about what the impact was in the budget as a result of all the numbers. And in fact, it was forcing us to consider an override of about $500,000. At the very, very last minute, and this is frustrating, I think, to all of us, that, by doing this on Thursday night, 2 days before the town meeting and 4 days before the election, it throws a curve into everything. First and foremost, the budget now, we have all the cuts and the budget impact statements that FinCom put out are all incorrect now, because now we have to go in and reanalyze the whole budget and figure out how to redistribute those cuts. Secondarily, it makes a mess of the override question, because the override question is 500. If the schools reduce the number by $200,000, in fact, we no longer need a $500,000 override. Common sense would say we need a $300,000 override. So it kind of, in talking to FinCom, and the chair is on here with it as well, and talking to FinCom and going through this, I basically, when this started to occur, I put together a meeting of the chair of the Board of Selectmen, the chair of the Finance Committee, the town accountant, the town attorney, and I to discuss what the hell do we do with this curveball that was thrown at us. And we came to the conclusion that there would be no way for myself and FinCom to try to articulate to the citizens of the town what that impact of that 190-something thousand cut would be. We just could not turn around a budget and change all those the impact statements and somehow educate people with no time to do that. So it really, the last thing that myself and the FinCon chairman want to do is stand up and not have the answers to a whole bunch of questions that people would ask. It would be embarrassing, and quite frankly, I think FinCom felt very strongly that we need to educate the public what's going on, and that would have put us in a position that we can't. So we had a lot of discussion, and we talked mostly in terms of, okay, what time do we need to, if we postpone the town meeting to give us time to adjust for all this, what would be the timeline that FinCom could meet again to be able to present to a new town meeting the information we need? We kind of settled on June 12th, and just to be clear, it wasn't set for anybody's, when they could be available. It was more set on a simple basis of when can the finance committee turn around and be prepared to do another town meeting. That was how we settled on the June 12th date. We also talked about, so I think we came to a general agreement that the only way to deal with this was to postpone the town meeting. And as a result of that, I individually called every selectman to kind of let them know what was going on and why we were making the decisions we did. So I appreciate everybody taking the time with me to go through it. The secondary question that we talked about, yes, okay, we think we should delay town meeting, but should we delay the election? And, I think on the night we discussed it, we thought that it might be a good idea to discuss the election. Anita and I met the next morning to talk about that and what the impact of that would be. And we really came to the conclusion that messing with the election at such a late date was a bad idea. First, because all the candidates have all been running and doing their election thing, and it was unfair to change the time of election when everybody was expected to vote and be involved and get everything done for the upcoming election on Monday. Now, the only impact it does, what it really does in terms of the election, it impacts the referendum question. And the question is now, what do we do with a $500,000 override where the number, in our opinion, now is invalid because we just don't need that much of an override? That's the real impact. And we felt that really shouldn't be what holds up doing the election on Monday. Anita felt very strongly for a lot of reasons, the impact on candidates, but also because on Monday, all the schools are closed, so we could do the election on Monday. But the schools then are going to be open all the way through June 22nd. So it would be very difficult to run an election without access to the schools all the way through the 22nd. So that would be another problem of postponing the election. So, the question of the override, and I'm going to give my recommendation. It's really up to you guys what you want to do. But I think if we go forward and encourage people to vote for the override, I think we would lose credibility because people are going to learn that the school system cut the $200,000, and it would look, why are you asking for a $500,000 override? If really, at most, you need a $300,000 override. And I don't think any of us want to be in a position to try to explain that. Now, the truth is, even though the townspeople would authorize a $500,000 override, does not mean that the Board of Selectmen would have to do that. They could only spend the $300,000, but once they give you that tax levy, it stays with the town forever, effectively. So, next year you could raise it by 200 grand without going back to citizens. So with the other avenue is, I think there's two avenues. One is that you can come out as a Board of Selectmen and recommend to people that the number is now invalid. We encourage you to vote down the override because it doesn't make sense anymore. Or two, I guess you could try to encourage people to vote the override and make a public statement saying the Board of Selectmen, even though they'll have the authority to increase the levy by 500,000, would not do that. We would agree that we're only going to do it for 300,000. But you can't take away in any way your ability to do that at some later date. I guess in my own personal way, I don't think the citizens would look upon that favorably, that they would trust us enough to give us a $500,000 override when we don't need it. But that's my personal opinion as to what a bunch of people might think. But at the end of the day, it really is your decision at this point. The school committee, I think, has put us in a very, very difficult decision by doing this last minute. And truthfully, I think it's wrong, but I'm happy that they reduced the assessment. And I really believe that was because of the hard work that all the towns did in terms of the managers and the selectmen who encouraged and said that they wouldn't support their budget. So I think that finally put pressure on the school committee. And I think they were really worried that they were actually going to lose two towns and then have to go to a 112 budget. So I think that pressure helped. And I think the pressure of the finance committee and the override of talking about the impact of what we would lose in town side of governments also put more pressure on them. So I think it's good that they did it. I think it's horrible that they did it 2 days before the town meeting. And they put us in this really crummy situation. So, Anita, Anita's on here, and I asked Anita to be on because I wanted to get you guys to hear her input. I do see Lauren Goldberg is on here. And to give the legal perspective of this, I have a lot of conversation with Lauren about the legal part of this. And we talked about who had the authority to postpone town meeting. And it was the legal position that it was the moderator who did this. So obviously we brought Randy into this discussion. The letter I sent you today was developed by Lauren and given to Randy, who thought the letter was really good and decided to publish it this morning and make that decision. We had to hold on that public discussion because we didn't know for sure that on Thursday night the school committee was going to act to do the reduction. So we had to kind of hold up from our discussion on Wednesday night to get through Thursday night to see if they actually did what they said they were going to do. With that, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to have Anita opine a little bit about why she felt in our recommendation clearly is not to postpone the election. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like Anita to add in whatever I might have missed.
Sure.
Thank you. In addition to what Ron said, the other thing with postponing the election, it would still be the same ballot. So we'd still have the $500,000 override on a ballot. So that kind of loses the argument that that's going to change. And also, people have actually already voted. So the school is a big issue. We'd have to really postpone it. So I really think that even though it could run up to almost, $6,000 to have a special election, if that might be the way to go with just a ballot question after the schools get out.
So I'm going to make one comment on this override question. We have went in great lengths to explain why we needed a $500,000 override. And by what the school budget did, it decreases that override to $200,000. We still have a $300,000 problem that has to be dealt with. We can't all of a sudden say, "Oh, there's no problem," and somehow figure it out or make it up, because I think people go, "Well, why did you put a $500,000 override? Only $2,000 will cut by the schools, and now all of a sudden."
I'll be right there. I was just listening.
So I don't think the problem in any way. Joe, could you turn off your mic, please? I don't think the override problem is solved as a result of this. I think the override is significantly lower, and who knows, maybe we could even make some few adjustments to make it lower than 300, but it's still an issue because we publicly told the people it's an issue, and we have a lot of cuts that we're still going to have to make that are going to be significant cuts.
Well, the override itself should be lower than 300, because when you initially came to the board and asked for us to put an override question on, it was for 400. So if the school committee reduced it by 2, then we should be at around the $200,000 override. Is that not the case?
Well, here's the difference, Mr. Chairman. That is the case, and you're right. I asked for the 400,000. After the board decided to do under 500,000, I recognize that as being a very good thing, because in order to do only if we went back to the 400,000, we would still have to use the free cash to balance the budget. That 100 grand in free cash or 120 grand in free cash. So that's why if you want to make the override 200, you could do it. But in order to do that, you would have to use free cash to balance the budget. In my opinion, I think it's time we get off this free cash train and fix the budget once and for all, and then start clean in the next year's budget where we're not using free cash to balance the budget. So if you want to use free cash, yes, we can lower the override to 200. If you don't want to use free cash and want to fix that problem, then we would need a $300,000 override. Now, we may be able to find other adjustments during the month, but as of where we are right now, that would be the position.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Lauren.
if I may, thank you. First of all, hello, I'm sorry I was a few minutes late. The override, and I just want to make clear that the town's voters retain the ability to decide how much to spend. So even if there's levy capacity, the select board can't make a decision on its own. The town manager, administrator can't make a decision on his own. It's only town meeting that votes to spend the money. So even if there is more room in the levy, town meeting decides what amount to spend, and then town meeting decides that in the future. So I just wanted to make it clear that there's nothing the select board can do with the money. It doesn't exist until town meeting appropriates those funds.
Great.
Only distinguishing there, just to be clear, is that would only take a couple of hundred people at town meeting to make that decision versus the whole town, which would have to be done by increasing the levy capacity for all the voters. So the power is switched off to a few people versus the whole town and utilizing that extra capacity. So, but Lauren's absolutely correct. So
Your phone's ringing.
So, Mr. Chairman, one other comment about the date. I understand, this could put different selectmen and people, could be finance board members, could be anybody, as to, when we get into June, people start doing vacations and it causes problems. We didn't try to figure out a date that met anyone's really vacation time. The date we set up was to meet the needs of, we believe, the finance committee to do this in a reasonable amount of time. They had been working on this budget for the last couple of months, and we wanted to give them, we didn't want to force them to rush through it, but give them enough time to reasonably consider all the changes. So that's what the date, and I apologize if this date inconveniences some people or makes it a mess. We didn't think about that. It really wasn't the factor. It was really the needs of the finance committee to find it. Now, if we want, we can suggest other dates to the moderator. The moderator has control of the dates, so he can change the dates. But again, we might change it one way and help a couple other people and maybe hurt a couple of other people. So I don't know how you meet the needs of everybody in terms of that timing issue.
I want to ask a couple questions for Attorney Goldberg. We used MGL 39 section 10A versus the additional published from April of last year, that portion to extend the town meeting. I'm just curious what gives the town moderator and not the governing body the authority to move the meeting, because he doesn't have that authority in our bylaws.
Certainly. So first of all, there's a hierarchy of documents, and at the top is essentially, if you have a charter or special act, then comes the general laws, then comes the bylaws.
Right.
You can't adopt any bylaw that's inconsistent with the general laws or with your charter, which I know you guys, but I'm just saying that's the way that the hierarchy goes. So the difference here is that the special act essentially authorized, and I'm sorry, it's not a special act. It's a codified statute, and it was actually there before COVID-19 came along.
Right.
It said public safety weather-related emergency, and now it's expanded to say weather and public health. So the moderator, if the moderator believes that it will be a problem to hold the meeting because of COVID, and in this case, what we had discussed the other night was that, if the meeting went forward on Saturday, that there was no reasonable way that the finance committee would have recommendations then. And so you would wind up having to have another day of a meeting. And even though things are trending in a good direction, and even though more people are vaccinated, not everyone is. And so bringing that many people together twice seemed like a higher level risk.
Unnecessary risk.
Right. That's how that came about.
Okay, and so I'm just, one more question about the MGL, the chapter 39. It appears that we only can extend it, was it 14 days at a time? Are we gonna have to reconvene or re-extend?
No, that's such a good question too. No, under the law, as it was revised, and I don't know if it's even available except in the special act, and I can send it to you. It's the moderator has the ability under 3910A to delay for up to 30 days. Under 3910, if people are being excluded from a meeting, then the moderator on his or her own initiative can delay the date for up to 14 days. So they're two different remedies.
Yeah, so, but either way, we're going past that 30 days into the 37-day mark. So are we gonna have to reconvene it again?
No, so
Delay the
No.
meeting?
If I could, Mr. Chair, just to kind of wrap this up with a bow, the way that we did the declaration was less than 30 days. And it was a Saturday before the Saturday that I had understood you wanted to have town meeting. And it also says that it's likely it'll be further continued to that date. To further continue the meeting, the moderator would issue another declaration for a more limited time.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was my kind of special note in this when I sent you out the declaration. If you look at the declaration, you'll see it has a postponement to June 5th. And then Randy's going to do another declaration to get us from June 5th to June 12th. That covers that 30-day issue.
Okay, because, you know, excuse me, when we had talked about this the other day, Ron, with you, me, Karen, and Attorney Goldberg, we had run through some scenarios and what to present to the board. And I was under the impression, even after we talked this morning, Ron, that the June 12th was the proposed date, but that's why we were meeting tonight. So I think since then, you know, I've heard from a couple board members that will not be able to attend if it is on the 12th, which poses some concerns. So I did reach out to Karen this morning and asked her if it would be possible to request to move the meeting to the 5th, which would be the Saturday before. And that's kind of what I wanted to float it out to the board tonight. If that is more amenable to the board, if we can just loop Randy in. I think we have plenty of time to be able to loop Randy in and just make that correction for the town.
So was the answer from Karen, and she's well,
I'm not going to speak for Karen if she's on the call. I mean, I thought we had a pretty good conversation this morning about it, but I want to also allow her to give her opinion if that's something that she'd like to do.
So that was kind of part of the discussion we had, and
Right.
We were looking at the 5th as well, and we kind of thought that we wanted to give the finance board to the 12th to give them time. But if the chair of the finance committee believes we can do it on the 5th, and if the finance board can turn it around, I'm happy to work with them to try to turn it around for the 5th. But I was trying not to put too much stress on the finance committee. They've been under enough stress to give them appropriate time, but I'll leave that to the FinCon chairman to see what she's comfortable with.
Understood.
I do believe that we could probably manage to get it done by the 5th. The original date on our meeting that was tossed out was the 22nd of May, and that was way too tight.
That'll give you like an extra week and a half.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, actually,
Chairman, I would support that, and you know, we would go to the moderator and ask him to modify the date, and then, you know, we had to act quick. We only had a couple of days to pull this together.
understood.
So, you know, we got a date that worked, but if the moderator is comfortable with it, FinCom's comfortable with it, we can redo a reverse 911 and change the date and make it work to the 5th. I'm comfortable with that. Anita, I guess the only question is in terms of your postings and stuff, will that work for the 5th?
Yep, the 5th works fine.
Leah, you have your hand up.
Thanks. I just wanted to comment that we need to, I think it's important to have FinCom's feedback, but also we need to be mindful that the current public outreach has been that it's postponed to the 12th, and there's even been some confusion about that. I've received a number of messages questioning, is it the 5th or is it the 12th? Definitely. I think there was a little bit of confusion in a message that had gone out through the schools or something. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't gotten all the details, but I've had a number of people. So I just want to make sure that we have a date that's settled on and that public outreach is done well and not going. I know there's been a lot of public outreach just today on getting the word out that it's postponed till tomorrow and that it's postponed until the 12th, from tomorrow to the 12th. So that's my concern. As far as that side of things.
Yeah, I share that concern. I received a few messages today to Leah. And again, I apologize. I was under the impression that we were going to target that date, but that we were going to postpone, but then discuss the date tonight. So I think that was just a miscommunication, and we could clear that up. But we just need to make sure that that's loudly and clearly communicated. I also want to note too, I know that Attorney Goldberg, Ron, Anita, everybody, Dan, Karen, Becky, this kind of really threw us through a loop with what the school committee decided to do, and they were going to make an amendment on the floor. And again, it was a unanimous vote last night. I tuned in and watched the meeting. I think they had 19 members in attendance, and it was a 19-0 to reduce the assessments, which we certainly appreciate. I just feel like it kind of threw us under the bus a little bit with the timing. And in order to relay any sort of information that's accurate to the public at this point, and not throw the 3 months that, or even longer, that Karen and her team have been working on this out the window, we need to take our time and make sure that we get all the information out and do it right. And that's part of it, Leah, is communicating the date, the time, having a unified message on everything, and moving that forward. And I know, Lauren, I think you had your hand up before Leah. I wanted to see if there was something you wanted to bring up.
Oh, certainly. I just wanted to point out that the moderator's declaration actually does say to the 5th. So I don't think we need to do anything again, but I agree that the public messaging would definitely get the word out. There's no need to do that whole declaration. So at least that's convenient. And again, any part that I might have had in thinking that we had a plan, I do apologize for that. I do think that it felt like we had a plan and we were moving. So again, obviously I only want to do what you guys want me to do. So I do apologize for that.
No, I think we did, Lauren, and I know that you've been working really hard on it. I just think that when we're all together as a board, I think certain things, there was some confusion around a couple different things, and it's good that we're able to meet to kind of clear everything up. But there was, and I know that you've been working really hard on it. So, we certainly as a board appreciate your counsel on how to kind of get this right and make sure that everybody is informed and there's a way to move forward on it. So it's certainly appreciated. But at this point, I want to, if anybody on the board, our board, has feedback, Leah, I see your hand up. Jeff, I know that this is going to be your last meeting, so anything you want to add to, but it's certainly up to the board for discussion if they want to weigh in on either the election or the town meeting, and kind of any questions they have about how that budget process worked out with the school. We'll open it up to the board. Leah, you have your hand up.
Mitch, I just was looking at the declaration, and there is one sentence in the declaration that says, "I would further request that the town make every effort to notify the community that town meeting has been recessed and delayed until June 5th, at which time it will be recessed until June 12th, and that more information will follow." So I just want to be mindful that if we are changing it to the 5th, that piece is taken out, so that there's not confusion of, are we going to have a meeting? Do we have to wait until the 6th or the 4th to find out that it's recessed till the 12th or whatever?
So you're absolutely right. And that would be easy for me to adjust. Lauren sent me the document, so I would just have to kick out that 12th date, put it back on the 5th, and then make the headline say, instead of saying town meeting postponed the 12th to the 5th. But that's why I kind of would like to hear the board and Karen's thought if everybody agrees to the 5th, because I'd like to go back to Randy and tell Randy that's the concept. And I don't even know if Karen's had a chance to talk to her board about that date.
Karen has her hand up. Karen, go ahead.
Okay, so my question would be is, before we start having all these conversations about the 5th, has anyone reached out to Wachusett to see if they're available?
So the answer to that question is no. We have not yet, because, first of all, this has only been active today. Anita and you were talking about that. Yes, we have to reach out for them. There's also some question of, do we still want to hold it at the high school, or do we want to kick it back to Glenwood? I know that Randy is pondering that question right now. So hopefully Randy can give us an answer and we can do that messaging all at one time. But I'd have to reach out with Randy on Monday and find out what the decision.
To further answer that question too, Karen, we hadn't reached out about the 12th yet either. is my understanding, because this is something we've kind of had to adapt to on the fly because of the way that the budget worked out.
Okay, so I guess my recommendation would be is before anything further goes out to the public, we figure out if the space where we're going to have it is available.
I think that's why we got to get Randy's kind of final decision on where he wants to do it, at the high school or at the Glenwood School. So, you know, that's a conversation I can have with Randy on Monday and see what he thought about that position over the weekend.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments?
I don't know how to raise my hand, so can I raise it this way?
Yep, Anita, and then
The one thing that I was thinking that would be really helpful is if we could have some signage on Monday at the election, letting people know that there is a definite date. But that might be too quick to do that. But that would be a way to definitely reach, you know, the town meeting members.
Well, we did have the. When is a dumb question, but Ron, when is that electric sign going in? Because I know that the base was installed. I know that the concrete was donated. Joe and his team poured it. I'm imagining the install for that's kind of a complicated process, so that's probably not feasible for.
Yeah, I truthfully I don't know. I talked to Fran about it, and they were postponing first because of the frost in the ground, and then the postponement became a problem as a result of the water line issue. So finally, Joe resolved that issue, and I don't know. Joe's on this call. Maybe Joe can give us an answer if Fran gave him a date for when they're going to actually start installing.
Well, I think too, Anita did. The A-frames went out. I saw them in front of Community Hall. How easy would it be to just change the lettering to get that turned around, do you think, for early next week, Monday or Tuesday, to put them out? Is that a...
I mean, it might depend on who we could get to do it, but you know, if we're not gonna, we might be rushing. If we can't manage to do it for Monday, I think we have, you know, a few days next week, before we do it. That was just my thought, that we could let people know at the polls. But I know Fran did a rush job for us, Fran Steiner, with the signage that we were going to be using at the high school. So.
Well, maybe we could reach out. I mean, I'm sure he'd be able to turn something around quick. I know that he likes doing stuff for the town, so.
I know Joe already changed the electronic sign that he has and changed the date on that already, so that's done. We pulled a sign out from in front of the community center, or not the community center, in front of the town hall, so that the sign wouldn't be wrong. Then we did all the posting. It's on all the different social media sites. It's on the town webpage. So anything we felt we could do, we did it. The reverse 911 that they did this morning, and Michael was going to do a second reverse 911 this evening. So we're trying to hit every possible way to inform people, and that's what we would. If we change it to the 5th, we'd be doing the same kind of things.
Lyndon.
Yeah, I just wanted to check, Ron. I know that at the Finance Committee, they were questioning if the override were to fail and whether you can do an override or not. You were going to talk to council as far as the flexibility with that, because with the 500,000, you know, it's a very good chance it might fail. And what would be our options after that?
Lyndon, that's a very good question. And Darren, and as you said, Darren asked me at the finance board level. So the very first conversation I had this morning was with Lauren. Lauren has assured me, she's here, she's assured me that you can have as many override questions as you want. That's up to the town for special elections. So that is not an issue, but I appreciate you asking, because even when Darren said it, I thought it was an issue, but Lauren assured me that that's not a problem.
What if, Lauren, is it possible, and just to compound that question a little bit, just to clear it up from my knowledge, if you have an override that passes, can you do multiple overrides in a year, even if the first one would pass?
Yes.
Okay.
The point of an override is, as you know, there's two parts to an override, right? One is the appropriation part that town meeting does, and one is the authorizing the levy limit to be raised. So you need both of those parts. You do have a requirement that you give the town clerk at least 35 days written notice of the form of the question. And because we're still in the COVID timeframe. There's still the ability to use early voting by mail, and so that's the situation now. If you vote a contingent, if you vote something on a contingent basis, hypothetically, if the override were to fail, then when we got to town meeting, if the election is going to be after town meeting, we would vote it contingent upon an override. And we talked a little bit about contingency and what that means. It means you wouldn't have that increase until you had an election. Under state law, following an annual town meeting, you have up until September 15th to hold one or more special elections. And you can hold as many as you want. I'm not suggesting that you do, but as long as you had 35 days notice, written notice to the town clerk.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you, just a question, Lauren and Anita. I think we recognize that the override was 500. Now, in effect, it would be 300 or less. Things change, but I don't suspect major changes anymore. But what's the date that the Board of Selectmen would have to decide on authorizing the new override? What would be, because you have to post and everything else, and we can't have it, the schools close for the election on the 22nd-ish, and we have to have the override done before July 1st, I would think, because that's when the fiscal year starts. So it limits our time to do that override, but I guess I'm wondering how quickly would the Board of Selectmen have to act to do that, and what's the time frame for that?
Well, Anita, you want to let me handle that one? Okay. So the short answer is that 35-day period that we're talking about is the limitation on holding the election. There is nothing that requires the override to pass by July 1. It's certainly the typical result is to have the override soon thereafter, but it is not required, and that's why you have until September 15th. Obviously, it needs to be there needs to be some point at which you move forward with a fixed budget, and you also need to get your tax rate set soon after that. So
if
you have until September 15th.
If it was after July 1st, though, your annual town meeting would be approving a budget that wasn't balanced, right?
Well, it wouldn't be, because it would be balanced, because that amount, the extra amount, the override amount, would be contingent on the override. Okay. So it's like that money wasn't appropriated yet, and then as soon as the override happens, if it were to pass, that money becomes available, and all of those other things that were going to be funded through the override are funded.
I think I just wanted to let the select board know about that, because we are going to have to make a decision on that relatively soon to decide how we're going to move forward with that. So
yeah, and
I think we'll have to work with you, Ron and Karen, to see what exactly we need, and we can have that discussion at one of the next future board meetings.
Yep.
All right. Does anybody else from the board have any questions or comments? Do we want to take a vote for the date? Is that what we want to do?
I don't think you need to set a date, although we want to know if we want to ask the moderator to change it to the 5th. That's fine. But I guess the bigger question for me right now that I think we do need to take a vote on is the question of what position is the Board of Selectmen taking on the override question. I think that's really important, because I think if we move forward without saying anything, we lose credibility, where people will be going, how come there's a $500,000 override when we know the school's cut 200 grand? So I guess I would recommend it, and I think it would give the board more credibility if the board comes out and says, hey, we understand the number is invalid, and we are recommending that because of that, we are recommending that the citizens vote down the override.
Okay.
That would be what I would say.
I think two things. First, I just want maybe then a verbal agreement from everybody on the call that the 5th is going to work for them if we request that from Randy for our board, because we heard from Karen. Does that work for everyone on our board before we move forward to the second part of the override?
Works for me.
Nichols, aye.
And Leah, how about you?
I could make the 5th or the 12th work, so that's fine.
I'm sorry?
I could make the 5th or the 12th work, so either one would be fine.
And Jeff, you're more than welcome to attend. Honorary guest. Lauren, that works for you too, if we ask Randy to that original postponed date? Okay. The second part of it, I want to be clear, Ron, when you indicate that it would give the board credibility. I think, I don't want to push back, but I want to just correct and say, I think we've started from a point of credibility because we put all the work in. Karen and her team have put all the work in. This isn't something where we're correcting an action that we've taken. This is something where the school committee made a last minute decision that has kind of forced the alteration of our budget. So it's not that we're going to be gaining credibility. It's more that we're continuing our fiscal responsibility and providing as much information to the residents as we can. So if your recommendation, it sounds like the fiscally responsible thing to do, in my opinion, would be to come out with a statement unanimously from the board saying, you know, the budget numbers have changed at the last minute. In consideration of that, while there still may be cuts, we can't recommend voting yes on the $500,000 override at this time in good fiscal conscience. And the reason that I want to do that, and that I would prefer to do that, is because even though we can vote the override, and then the town meeting has the right to appropriate the funds, as Attorney Goldberg so much more intellectually put than what I'm saying right now, I don't trust giving, I don't think we can justify raising taxes, even conceptually, more than we need to, if that's the route that the board decides to take, and if that's the route that the town decides to take. So I want to have a discussion on that. If we want to keep it brief, I know it's Friday night, but I'd love to hear from the board members on what their opinions are on that issue.
Through the chair.
Skip and then Leah. Yep.
I'm not for the override anyway. From day one, I wasn't for it. So count me as not wanting it at all.
Okay, Leah.
Thanks, Mitch. I think that makes sense because I don't think that we can in good conscience ask for that. And I also wonder if in the future coming down the pipe, we get more firm numbers from the state as far as on the revenue side, if that might adjust our budget. So we may even be able to additionally not necessarily even need that 300,000 that we are thinking we need right now.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Leah, because I'm glad you brought that up. I have heard some rumors floating around about different things on both the school side and the state side in terms of funding avenues that may alter both school spending and municipal spending. So I think that's a great point to bring up as well. Yeah. Does Jeff or Lyndon or even Karen, because I know that you and your team have been so involved with this, have any objection to kind of the way that we're looking at it? Lyndon and then Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I voted against the school budget, and I beat the override because I think the school budget was driving it in the first place. So I agree. I wasn't supportive of the override in general. So I have no problem in saying that I support voting down the $500,000 override. And the other concern we have that was brought up is that the school's going to be using non-revolving revenues to do what they're doing to decrease the budget, which is going to be a concerning problem going forward into the next fiscal year. I think that needs to be a discussion as well.
If I could, Mr. Chairman,
yeah. Well, I mean, real quick, I sat in that meeting last night, and I'm a little concerned because the information, Ron, when Dr. McCall had provided that letter, which indicated that's a different conversation really than what was had last night at the school committee meeting, which I'm concerned because it sounds like the school committee, even with these lowered assessments, are positioning themselves to where there will not need to be a correction in the coming years. And it was brought up last night that there would be a reduction in potentially PPE purchases. You even had Dan mentioned that they were starting a rainy day fund for excess funds, which was concerning to me because, I don't, if we have to be fiscally responsible, I'm not sure where that money's going. But the letter that we received and the school committee meeting, we need to get some clarification on that, Lyndon, because the letter and the meeting were conflicting in the information that was being provided to the public. And I think that's going to be part of the next month, what we do in terms of our due diligence financially to make sure that we're poised well going into next year. And your point too about the override, I think, we all might have different opinions on whether we support an override. Conceptually, I lean more conservatively on the fiscal side, but I think the conversation we had when we decided that 500,000 was whether to put it to the voters or not. So, now we're saying, no, don't vote for the 500,000. The future conversation we're going to have is, are we going to put it to the voters again for a reduced amount, not whether or not we as individual board members would support it, because I know that we have different opinions on that as well. But Jeff, I think that you had your hand up too.
No, I concur with the chair's opinion. I'm not for an override anyways, like Skip. And I concur. I'd like to, it would be nice if we were all unanimous in our decision and our transparency to the public that this is our recommendation to vote no. And I'm fine with the June 5th date and fine with the Monday election.
Okay, Ron, and then I'd like to get Karen to weigh in after Ron if she would like to.
I just want to comment to Lyndon's point, because I think it's a very excellent point and one that me and you had discussion about, Mr. Chairman. I've talked to the town manager at Holden, and there's a big question if they're going to support or not support the budget in Holden, the school assessment, because of that whole issue of, here we go again, we're going to use one-time revenues to balance the budget, and we're going to get clobbered next year because they're using one-time revenue budget. So I wouldn't be surprised even with this reduction, and frankly, I think my position would say the same, is still to vote against the school budget, because if they are in fact using one-year revenues, all that's going to do is set us up for a big fall next year. So that, I think, is going to become a very big issue, and we have to discuss that, because I know I'm not, and I don't get a vote, but I'm not going to be in any way supportive of a school assessment that is based upon a house of cards, and that's that one-time revenue thing. We got to get away from that one-time revenue problem, both on the school side and on the town side. I think it's critical to fix that when we can. So.
Okay.
Let's vote.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I can, I listened to the school committee meeting last night, and at least that conversation did start coming up in the school committee meetings about using the one-time revenues and using it for expenses that would hopefully be a dwindling need, PPE, the increase in staff and everything. So while I don't necessarily know that it's sustainable there yet, I think at least that conversation is starting to be had, and that's a big development because it hadn't been in the past. So I think that's a big props to everybody that's been working, all the towns and everybody that's been working to just try to bridge the gap with that relationship too, because that's conversations that used to not happen.
And I want to give out, Karen, do you have anything you want to add specifically about the override? I want to give you the opportunity to weigh in if you so choose.
The Finance Committee was under the impression this meeting tonight was to decide whether to move the town election. I am a little disappointed that there's no discussion on that. It's more of the date and it's more the override. So that's, So we're not having any discussion tonight on moving the town election. It's staying on Monday.
Well, we can have that discussion if the board so chooses. I know Ron and Anita and Lauren had briefed us on the difficulties behind moving it and some of the cons of moving it. But again, I'm willing to entertain if the board wants to make a motion or to entertain that idea. More than happy to have that conversation.
It's Leah. I would just at least like to hear FinCom's perspective on things. I was on FinCom meeting off and on last night. So I would appreciate just hearing their perspective.
Well, the town meeting, the reason why we moved the election to be after the town meeting was so that new candidates were not sitting up front when questions came at them, and they could say, well, I don't know, I wasn't involved. So I remember that when that got moved. Now we're going to potentially have 2 new members of the select board and at least potentially 1 new member on the planning board. Both of those boards play a big role in the town meeting. So that was our concern, as well as the whole time we've been asking to move the town meeting since pretty much, I think, week 3 of our budget discussions, and we were told we couldn't. And then we were sticking with working our butts off to get the budget done so that we would be able to educate the voters to vote appropriately. So now it's like, oh, don't worry about it. We can handle another special election. We're not, I look at it as, so we're going to do 2 elections instead of 1. And we go to the presidential elections and the school. I know we've had special elections in the past when schools are open. So I just don't understand.
Well, I think it wouldn't be 2 elections instead of 1, because the ballot that's printed now would still have to be the ballot with the $500,000 on it. So you have to have, if you were going to place another override for a different amount, you'd have to have that special election for that override item anyway. So regardless, there would be 2.
Okay.
Anita, is that correct, or is that? Yeah. Anita, you're on mute, but it's.
There we go. Yeah, it would be the same ballot. So that's basically why it doesn't make sense to do it. We couldn't, actually, I just got the invoice for printing the ballots and it's $2,800. So we can't, we couldn't print new ballots if the meeting was just postponed rather than calling a new election.
There isn't a way to cancel that ballot and start a new one since we're going to be waiting 35 days?
I don't believe so. That might be a question for Lauren, but that's the ballot that the warrant was called, the questions on that ballot.
But we have 2 weeks to redo the warrant before the June 5th meeting. We'd have 35 days to do I'm just trying to mitigate having 2.
But it would be the same ballot. Postponing, we would still be using the same ballot.
Anita, I think perhaps what Karen is suggesting, and I'm sorry for just jumping in, Mr. Chair, I should have gone through you. I think what she's suggesting is that you could have that second election on the same day as a delayed election. So you pay for the ballots, but you wouldn't pay for all of the things that you might otherwise pay for. It's still an expense, and it's harder to run. It's more difficult and more complicated to run 2 elections on the same day, as you well know. But I think that's what Karen was getting at.
I just think all the concerns that we have about moving the town meeting to June because of people's vacations, having that override election later in June, people are going to be on vacation, people are going to be away, and we need this. I don't know. It's not for me to say.
Wait, we're not moving the meeting to June because of people's locations or people's vacations. We're moving the meeting because we don't have a budget number.
I understand that. Well, what I'm saying is we were concerned about which day to make sure that we had enough people and whatnot. I get all of that. I guess we're going to need, in order to mitigate damages to the town and to the town employees and town services, we're going to need something. I think we're doing detriment to being able to pass it. That's my personal opinion.
Understood. Does anybody else on the board have anything they want to add? I don't understand, Karen. I'm just trying to understand. I just want, if you could clarify, because I think it's important, how we're being detrimental. Because for me, it seems less confusing to have a unanimous vote from the board to vote no on the override, and then if we work out the budget and come up with a new number for an override to present to the voters, I mean, we don't know what that looks like yet. So I think we should probably take one in front of the other. Is that you're thinking we do everything at once with the ballot having that $500,000 and then an additional override on that same election?
If we wait until we have the budget available, and finish to decide what the proper amount of the override is, Anita would be running that election after some of the cuts will have already have to be done, because we will take it. It's not going to be done the first night we do this. So for 35 days, we're going to be pushing it after June 30th for the override. If we want to get a true number. It's fine. Whatever you guys decide. I just was misunderstood as to what the purpose of the meeting was.
Okay. Do any members of our board want to move the election?
No.
Okay. Seeing none, the only thing that we have then to vote on tonight would be what our response should be to the $500,000 override question being posed Monday.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear here, and I want to make sure I know exactly what the wording you want to say, because, you know, the election is Monday. Literally, if you give me that wording, I'm going to be changing the town administrator's Facebook page. I'm going to be asking Anita to put it on all the town website what your position is too. We have very little time to get that done. So I want to make sure we have a exact statement of what the Board of Selectmen wants to say. So me and Anita are not trying to ad lib that statement, you know?
Okay. I think we can just give you Lauren, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair, what I was going to suggest is, I don't know that we actually have to write it here right now, but certainly if you are authorized to coordinate with Ron and Nita, and I certainly am willing to assist as well, you could come up with a statement as long as you knew what the board was comfortable with. If not, we can write it now, and I'll just give it a shot.
The general statement, Mr. Chairman, would be that the Board of Selectmen recommends that the citizens of Rutland vote down the override question of $500,000 because the amount is now invalid as a result of the school committee's vote, and that the issue will be taken up at a later date. Something to that degree. Does that make sense, Lauren? Mm-hmm. If that type of message works for you guys, Lauren and I can craft that right after this meeting quickly. And I just know that because we're running out of time, we need to post it on the town websites immediately to give time for people to see it before Monday's election.
Yeah, I want a little bit more background. I think, something to the effect of, because of the last minute nature of the budget change proposal from the Wachusett Regional District, we need to revisit that number. We encourage all residents to vote no on the $500,000 override. I don't want to convey that it's something that we did our due diligence on our end. And I want that to be clearly resonated in whatever message that goes out, is that our FinCom and our board has worked their tails off to make sure that we were prepared, and that this was kind of something that had got sprung on us last minute. And in order for us to be fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars, we have to revisit this issue, and we have to encourage the public to vote no for that override on Monday. So I wanted a little bit more broad or expanded than what you had brought. I think that you can understand where I want to go with it.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Lauren, you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I actually wrote some of it down, but I do think, Mitch, I'd feel more comfortable if you get a last look just to make sure you're okay with it.
Yeah, as long as the board's amenable. And Lyndon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question regarding people that did early voting who may be upset that may have supported it, but now would not support it. I mean, do they have any rights? Or I imagine that you may get some calls concerning that.
They can vote in person on election day as long as their ballot hasn't been counted. And I know Anita is careful about that. So if there's concern about that, just as a practical matter, she can wait till later in the day to process any early voting or absentee ballots.
Of course.
Thank you.
Again, just so that it's out there one more time, and that anyone who voted either by absentee, over the counter, or by so-called early voting can come down to the election, can come in on election day, and they're entitled to 2 more ballots. It's just, one to mess up and then 1 more. So they can vote for how they want to vote no matter what, if they can get in.
So if the board is comfortable with it, then I guess what we're asking is, I think you heard the gist of the message from the chair, and anyone else that has some changes of message. But Lauren and I, immediately, if you have time, immediately following this meeting, we'll draft it up. And if it's okay, just to run it by the chairman for his approval. Once that's done, we will post that everywhere. Anita, I'm gonna have to talk to you and get it out to you, and so we can all get it posted tonight, if that's okay. If the board is acceptable to that, the chair can review it, but I think we all know what the message is. So I think we just submit how we tailor it. If Lauren, you want to take first crack at it, and you can comment in the cell, and I'll relay that message to the chair, and we can get the approval and just move forward.
Yeah, as I said, I caught some of what Mitch was saying, and I typed it up, so I'm 1/3 of the way there.
Any further questions from the board? If not, we'll just have a motion. I'll make a motion to allow Ron, Lauren, and myself to craft and review a comment similar to what was just discussed, to put out to provide information to the citizens of Rutland regarding the override vote on Monday.
And if the board of selectmen encourages people to vote no to the override,
right?
To be clear in that motion, so that's everybody wants to be unanimous on that point. We're asking, or the whole board is unanimous in suggesting that we're voting down the override.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll have a roll call vote. Stillings.
Stillings, aye.
Whitman.
Whitman, aye.
Nichols.
Nichols, aye.
Clark.
Aye.
And the city, aye. Motion carries unanimous. Is there any further discussion the board wants to have about either of these items before we entertain a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, you may, Peter.
I'm in the midst of typing up the TV announcement right now. So are we suggesting that town meeting will be moved to June 5 and not June 12?
That is correct.
I think we have to wait though for that decision to be made by the moderator. So I think that decision should formally be made Monday when we talk to the moderator.
Yeah, let's not jump the gun on that.
All right. Thank you.
Just if I would ask that at least Lauren stay on as the board adjourns to discuss that letter. And Mitch, if you want to hang out, we could do it, I think, in 5 minutes. I don't think it's going to take long.
Just real quick too, regarding the election, Peter, I was told, and I haven't seen it, I watched the interviews, that there was a closing message on the screen: vote or get what you deserve. I'm wondering if, maybe we could remove that. I'm not sure that looks totally professional. I don't know who made that decision, but just want to bring it to somebody's attention.
We can take care of that.
Thanks.
By the way, just for the board knowledge, that we are intending to have the board of selectmen meet in person on the 17th at the next meeting for those who would like to attend in person at the library. So we'll be giving you more information about, but that's the plan as of right now.
If I may.
Leah, go ahead.
I sensed Karen's frustration about the intent of this meeting, and I just want to say I also was under the impression that it was going to be more of a focus as to whether or not we were moving the meeting, from which I was trying to not partake in that aspect, because as a candidate on the ballot, I don't feel comfortable having discussion about that. My focus was on the ballot question. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I think there was some miscommunication beforehand as far as going out as to the intent of this meeting.
Well, I'll be really clear. I mean, in my message at the very beginning of the meeting, I talked about just that, the fact that there was concern about moving the election, and that I and Anita both recommended against it. So I thought that would be the main point of tonight's discussion, but there was a lot of discussion that came in as to the changing of the date of the town meeting that I think got in because there was some clear concerns about people being on vacation or being away. So, but that was my intention, to have most of the conversation be on the election issue, just to put it clearly on the record.
Well, yeah, I think we had that. I mean, I had asked several times if anybody wanted that election moved. I just don't think, after listening to Anita and Lauren and Ron, I'm not sure, and I understand those concerns, I'm not sure that that's the right decision to move that election. But again, I'll ask one last time before we adjourn, if anybody on the board wants to entertain moving the election, please speak up now or forever hold your peace, because now is the time that you have to do it. Okay, see, and again, I mean, that was I think we all had a different impression because all this came together last minute, what this meeting was going to be. And I knew that we were going to discuss the moving of the election, but again, we had that discussion and we heard from everyone. And if the board wants to do it, they can do it. But it doesn't sound like that's the case. So everybody had the opportunity to weigh in on that.
Okay, I make a motion to adjourn.
Did we have a vote? I'm sorry. I guess I lost track.
We did have a vote. Yeah, we did.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mitch, this is Ted from the FinCom. Could I ask two quick questions?
Sure.
One is, should the message that goes out to voters include something along the lines of that there's a possibility another override number will be put before them? And the other question, and I think I heard you guys discussing this, but I couldn't be sure, what will happen to people that have already voted and may have voted in a way on the override that is now no longer what they're being asked to vote?
Yep. So Attorney Goldberg just answered that second part of your question, Ted, that for folks that may have already voted for the override and wish to change their vote, or vice versa, they can vote in person, and those votes haven't been counted that have been mailed in, so they'll have the opportunity to correct that vote in person if they so choose, to have that vote counted the way they want it to be counted. As your first question, I'm not sure we can make a statement indicating a second override until both FinCom and the Board of Selectmen know what the budget looks like, and the selectmen have a discussion based on whether that's something they even want to entertain again and put out to the voters. We haven't had that discussion yet, so I don't feel comfortable including that personally in a message until the board has a chance to discuss that further.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second, Nichols.
All right, any further discussion for anyone here in the meeting? All right, hearing none, we'll have a roll call vote. Stillings.
Stillings, aye.
Whitman.
Whitman, aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Nichols.
Nichols, aye.
And Residia, aye. Motion carries unanimous.